In a quiet town shrouded in mystery, an old golden retriever named Marley waits patiently on the porch of an abandoned house, day after day, year after year. But what exactly is he waiting for? When a shy girl named Lacey moves into town and discovers a forgotten letter, she realizes Marley's patience holds a powerful secret that will change not only her life, but an entire community. What happens when promises whispered to the wind finally find their way home? The late autumn breeze swept through the sleepy town of Willow Creek, a quiet little place tucked between pine-streaked hills and amber fields. Yellow leaves pirouetted down from the old elms that lined Maple Street, carpeting the sidewalks in gold. A cool dusk hue lingered in the sky, soft and melancholy, as if the town itself was holding its breath between the warmth of fall and the chill of approaching winter. 11-year-old Lacey Quinn stood at the edge of the sidewalk, her canvas, sneakers crunching over leaves. She was small for her age, with long ash-brown hair that curled slightly at the ends and wide, hazel eyes that often seemed to be looking beyond the present. Her face was pale, still carrying the quiet grief of someone who had recently said goodbye to something too big for her age to understand. Just 3 months earlier, her father had passed away after a long illness, and her mother had decided they needed to leave Chicago behind, to start over somewhere that didn't smell like hospital disinfectant and echo with unfinished lullabies. Their new home sat halfway down Maple Street, a modest white house with blue shutters and a front yard overtaken by wild mint. Lacey's mother, Janelle Quinn, a worn but kind-eyed woman in her 30s with wavy auburn hair and hands that always seemed to be wiping something invisible away, was unpacking inside. Janelle had once been cheerful and quick-witted, but after her husband's death a quietness had settled in her, a stillness like fog that hadn't lifted yet. Lacey, curious and solitary, wandered toward the very end of the street, where a house stood half hidden behind a curtain of untrimmed bushes and a rusted gate. It was an old wooden home, weathered grey, the paint peeling in flakes like bark. The porch sagged on one end, and the shutters hung unevenly, as if they too had tired of standing watch. Then she saw him, a dog, sitting squarely at the edge of the porch, with fur the color of baked honey and ears that drooped slightly forward. He was a golden retriever, older perhaps around 10 or 11, with a greying muzzle and deep-set brown eyes that held a weary gentleness. His posture was dignified, but relaxed, like a retired knight still keeping an eye on the kingdom. There was no collar, but his coat, though slightly matted, was thick and gleaming beneath the orange light of sunset. His gaze followed her without blinking, calm but alert, as if he had been waiting. "Hi," Lacey said softly. The dog didn't move, but his tail thumped twice against the wooden planks. She stepped forward, hesitant. "Do you live here?" The porch groaned as she climbed it. The dog rose slowly, not to bark or growl, but simply to meet her. He sniffed her hand, then licked it once. The gesture was warm, but it felt oddly ceremonial, like being given permission. She sat next to him, hugging her knees. They looked out over the yard together, watching as shadows stretched long over Maple Street. "I don't really like talking to people," she confessed, "but I guess dogs are different." From the yard next door, a voice startled her. "So he found another one, did he?" Lacey turned to see an older man watching her from over a low picket fence. He was tall, with a stiff posture and an air of caution, like someone who didn't like being surprised. His grey hair was buzzed short, military style, and his skin was sun-worn with age spots scattered like old maps. He wore a flannel shirt tucked neatly into jeans and held a gardening trowel in one hand. His name was Floyd Hargrove. "He's been sitting on that porch every evening for over a year," Floyd said. "Just waiting, doesn't go far, doesn't bark, just waits." "What's his name?" Lacey asked. Floyd shrugged. "No one knows. He showed up after the family who lived there moved away. Some say he belonged to the girl who lived there, but she left too. Or maybe didn't." Lacey looked at the dog, her fingers brushing his fur. "I think he needs a new name." Floyd leaned his elbows on the fence. "Just be careful, kid. Dogs like that, they carry stories on their backs, sometimes more than one heart can bear." Lacey nodded solemnly. She didn't know why, but the name Marley rose to her lips unprompted. It felt right, soft and old-sounding, like something out of a dusty music box. She whispered it once. The dog's ears perked, and he gently laid his head in her lap. "Marley it is then," she said, and smiled for the first time in days. That night, Lacey begged her mother to let Marley stay. Janelle, though initially hesitant, relented after seeing the light in her daughter's eyes. Light she hadn't seen in months. Marley was bathed in warm water, fed with leftover roast chicken, and given a corner of Lacey's room to sleep in, where he curled up on a quilted blanket without a sound. Later, as the house grew quiet, Lacey couldn't sleep. She tiptoed downstairs with a flashlight and wandered back to the old house, drawn by something she couldn't name. Marley followed at her side, padding through the leaves like a ghost from an old memory. They sat on the porch again. The moon was high now, casting silver over the cracked steps and the empty swing swaying slightly in the wind. Lacey leaned back against the wall, hugging her knees. "Do you think people can find their way back to places they loved, even if they leave?" Marley rested his chin over her feet. As the wind picked up, something inside the house rattled. A window, or maybe an old hinge shifting in its sleep. Lacey turned toward the sound. She didn't know it yet, but behind those walls, beneath dust and silence, the remnants of a forgotten story were waiting. All it needed was someone willing to listen, and a dog who had never stopped watching the door. The morning air in Willow Creek was crisp, the kind that bit gently at your cheeks and hinted at frost soon to come. Sunlight filtered through the trees lining Maple Street, painting moving patterns across the Quinn's kitchen floor. The smell of toasted bread and black coffee mingled with the distant chirping of birds. Janelle stood by the stove in a faded flannel robe, hair pulled into a messy bun, her face drawn from another restless night. Grief had taught her to function, but not quite live. Upstairs, Lacey was already awake, curled up on the floor beside Marley. The golden retriever had taken to sleeping there as if he'd always belonged. She gently stroked his ears, whispering half-formed thoughts about school, music, and dreams she wasn't ready to admit aloud. After breakfast, Janelle handed Lacey a folded grocery list. "Think you're up for walking to Carson's Market today?" she asked, her voice soft with worry and hope. Lacey nodded, eager for a reason to bring Marley along. As they passed the old house at the end of the street again, something tugged at Lacey. The porch looked different in daylight, less haunted, more paused. She hesitated. "We've got time, boy," she murmured, tying Marley's leash to the porch railing. He gave a low woof of protest, but stayed put, tail thumping the boards. Lacey slipped around to the back of the house, where the door hung slightly ajar. Inside, dust motes danced in the slanted light from broken windows. Cobwebs veiled corners. Furniture lay under white sheets like ghosts sleeping through the years. She stepped into what had once been a living room. A toppled bookshelf spilled its contents across the floor. A small wooden box near the fireplace caught her eye, ornate, scratched, with a faded sunflower carved on the lid. She opened it carefully. Inside were old envelopes, their ink faded, but legible. She pulled one out. It was addressed to no one. The handwriting was delicate, looping. The paper trembled slightly in her hands. "If you're reading this, I'm sorry I left. I had to. They didn't understand, and I couldn't stay silent anymore, but I promised I'd come back. Marley will wait, he always does. Ellie." Lacey sat down hard on the dusty floor. Her fingers brushed the name again. Ellie. So Marley was waiting for someone, and that someone might still come. She stuffed the letter in her coat pocket and stood, heart racing. Something about this mystery made her feel less lost, like maybe she wasn't the only one trying to find her way back to something broken. Meanwhile, just a few blocks away, Floyd Hargrove stood outside the Willow Creek Library. The small brick building looked like a converted schoolhouse, with ivy creeping along one side and windows that always fogged up in winter. Floyd hadn't been in a library in over a decade. His boots clicked against the polished wood floor as he entered, unsure what he was even looking for. Maybe old records or confirmation that Ellie had ever existed. Behind the front desk sat Sarah Mulvaney, the head librarian. She was in her mid-60s, tall and wiry, with tightly curled silver hair that framed her face like windswept vines. Her eyes were pale blue, kind but often distant, as though always listening to some memory only she could hear. She wore a long maroon cardigan over a faded dress with a hummingbird brooch pinned near her collarbone. "Can I help you?" she asked, without looking up from stamping a return. Floyd cleared his throat. "I'm looking for information on the house at the end of Maple, the one nobody talks about." Sarah's hand stilled. She looked up, studying him. "Ellie Munro's house?" "I think so. Girl disappeared around 15 years ago, right? Family moved away overnight?" Sarah gave a small nod. "She was my niece." There was a pause, thick and unexpected. "I didn't know," Floyd said quietly. "I'm sorry." Sarah waved it off with the tired grace of someone who had grieved too long. She was gifted, music, art, writing. But something happened. Family got quiet. Ellie got quieter. She stood and walked toward a back shelf, pulling down a brown folder tied with green ribbon. "I kept this," she said, handing it over, "just in case someone ever asked." Inside were old photographs. Ellie as a child with Marley, sitting on that same porch, both smiling in the way only the very young do. A newspaper clipping announced her winning a state music award at age 10. Another showed her performing in a white recital dress, fingers poised over ivory keys. She disappeared a few weeks after that, Sarah said. "No explanation. My sister refused to talk, claimed she was unstable, prone to daydreams." Floyd frowned. "You think she left on her own?" "I think she was pushed." They sat in silence for a while. "Some girls moved into the neighborhood," Floyd finally said. "Found the dog, took him in, the same dog." Sarah's lips parted slightly, her breath catching. "Marley?" He nodded. "He waited," she whispered. Back at the Quinn house, Lacey returned from her walk, groceries tucked under one arm, the letter still burning a hole in her pocket. She rushed to her room and pulled out a shoebox she'd started calling her maybe box. It held drawings, torn sheet music, pressed flowers, things that felt like pieces of other people's stories. She added Ellie's letter to the top. Later that evening, Lacey told Janelle about the letter. Her mother listened while folding laundry, skeptical but patient. "You're sure it's safe going back to that house?" Janelle asked. Lacey nodded. "It's not scary, it's waiting." Janelle didn't respond, but something in her daughter's voice stirred a flicker of faith. After dinner, Lacey and Marley went back to the porch. She read the letter aloud again, and Marley lay beside her, eyes half closed but alert. A breeze stirred the trees. Somewhere, a wind chime sang a lonely tune. From the sidewalk, Floyd watched them from a distance. Sarah had joined him, her arms wrapped around herself, face unreadable. "She looks like Ellie did," she murmured. Floyd nodded. "And that dog, he hasn't looked this alive in years." Sarah turned away, blinking fast. "Maybe this is where the story starts again." Marley lifted his head and looked toward them as if agreeing, and in Lacey's hands the letter waited, its promise now shared. The air was sharp and cool, tinged with the faint scent of smoke from fireplaces beginning to stir across Willow Creek. Mist curled around the edges of streets and pathways, softening the morning sunlight to a silvery glow that glittered among the remaining autumn leaves. Lacey, bundled up in her lavender sweater and denim jacket, stepped out onto the porch, Marley trotting faithfully beside her, ears perked and tail gently swishing. It had been 3 days since Lacey had found Ellie's letter. Each night she'd read it again, trying to decipher every hidden emotion, every unspoken truth. Marley seemed to sense her unease, staying close, comforting her with warm, gentle nudges of his soft golden head. Today, as they started down Maple Street toward the edge of town, Marley's energy shifted suddenly. Urgent and determined, his nose pointed toward the narrow wooded path that led away from the houses. Lacey hesitated briefly, looking back towards her home, but Marley barked softly, a sound more encouragement than warning, and trotted forward into the trees. She followed, her feet crunching softly on the fallen leaves carpeting the forest path. They walked deeper into the woods, past towering oaks and whispering pines, until they emerged suddenly into a hidden clearing filled with wild lavender, blooming, out of season, rich and fragrant beneath the pale sky. In the heart of the clearing stood a forgotten piano, an upright relic, its wood weathered to silvery gray, the keys chipped and worn. The sight was oddly beautiful, haunting, as if the instrument itself had grown roots here, intertwined forever with the earth. Lacey approached carefully, her breath visible in delicate clouds. Marley sat back on his haunches, watching intently, eyes warm and reassuring. Gingerly she pressed one of the ivory keys, and a sweet but mournful note hung in the air, echoing softly through the clearing. Who would leave something like this? Here? She whispered, her voice trembling. Someone who once dreamed in music. Lacey turned quickly, startled by the voice. At the edge of the clearing stood a woman she'd never seen before. Tall and slender, her long dark hair flecked with grey fell loosely around her shoulders. Her face was calm and delicate, a tapestry of fine lines and quiet sorrows. She wore a long cardigan the colour of twilight, and her gaze held a gentle intensity. Thoughtful and kind. I'm sorry if I startled you, the woman continued softly, stepping forward. My name is Julia Winfield. Julia's smile was gentle, sad. This piano belonged to my husband. He used to teach piano lessons. One of his students, Ellie Monroe, used to come here to practice. Lacey's heart quickened. You knew? Ellie? Julia nodded slowly. Ellie was a sensitive soul, extraordinary like you. She came here when things at home became too difficult. Music was her escape, her sanctuary. As Julia spoke, Marley moved closer, sniffing gently at her hand. Recognition flickered in her eyes. And this must be Marley, she whispered softly, stroking his ears with affectionate familiarity. He never gave up waiting. Meanwhile, back in town, Floyd and Sarah stood together in front of a modest blue bungalow ringed by tidy hedges. Floyd knocked twice, the sound sharp and brisk, resonating in the quiet street. The door opened slowly, revealing an elderly man leaning heavily on a polished wooden cane. His hair was pure white, neatly combed, and he wore wire-rimmed glasses. His posture, though frail, still carried traces of dignity and confidence. His clear eyes, blue as winter sky, flickered with curiosity. Mr. Winfield? Floyd began. My name's Floyd Hargrove, and this is Sarah Mulvaney. Winfield's gaze moved to Sarah, and recognition slowly crossed his features. Sarah Mulvaney, Ellie's aunt, correct? Sarah nodded carefully. We're sorry to disturb you, but we're trying to understand what happened to Ellie. Winfield sighed deeply, his voice weary but kind. Please, come in. I've been waiting for this day for years. Inside, the house was warm, fragrant with cinnamon and old books. They sat together around a round oak table. Winfield folded his hands carefully, eyes thoughtful. Ellie was extraordinarily gifted, but misunderstood. Her parents didn't understand her sensitivity or passion for music. They viewed it as impractical, obsessive. When Ellie began isolating herself, they labeled her troubled. They were advised by doctors, wrongly I believe, that Ellie needed strict treatment away from home. Sarah's breath caught painfully. She didn't run away? Winfield shook his head sadly. No, her parents sent her away. Ellie believed Marley would follow, but the dog stayed waiting at her house. I tried to find her for years, but couldn't. Floyd frowned. Do you know where they sent her? Winfield's eyes clouded over. Somewhere far, an institution perhaps, but Ellie was resilient. She promised to return someday, to Marley, to music, to the place where she'd been happy. At the clearing, Julia stood quietly as Lacey explored the piano keys further. Notes echoed softly, melancholic yet hopeful. Marley rested quietly at her feet, his head raised, ears alert. Lacey felt warmth blossom inside her chest, a feeling unfamiliar yet comforting. Julia watched, eyes filled with quiet reflection. Maybe Ellie isn't so lost after all. Perhaps you're the key, Lacey. Lacey looked up, surprised. How do you know my name? Julia smiled gently. Marley brought you here, didn't he? Ellie used to believe in fate, in connections. No one else could see. I believe Marley chose you for a reason. Lacey glanced down at Marley, who looked up with serene trust. She breathed deeply, the lavender's fragrance filling her lungs, its calm seeping into her bones. Julia stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Never be afraid of mysteries, Lacey. They lead us back to ourselves, sometimes in ways we least expect. As Julia quietly walked away, Lacey turned back to the piano, her fingers dancing lightly across the keys. A soft melody emerged, not something taught but felt, a whisper of hope, remembrance, a promise to return. And Marley, faithful and patient, tilted his head slightly, listening to a song he'd known all along. The chill deepened in Willow Creek as late autumn eased toward winter. Mornings grew colder, skies stretched pale and brittle like parchment. Frost touched every blade of grass, making the world sparkle softly beneath the rising sun. Leaves had all but vanished, leaving the trees standing solemn and exposed, guardians watching silently over the quiet streets. Lacey awoke early that Saturday morning, her heart thrumming with anticipation. Marley lay beside her bed, his breathing soft and rhythmic. His golden fur gleamed in the dim sunlight filtering through her curtains, peaceful yet alert, ready as always for whatever journey awaited them. "Come on, Marley," Lacey whispered, gently nudging him awake. "Today, we find the secrets." Downstairs, Janelle was busy sorting through mail at the kitchen table, coffee steaming nearby. She looked up, eyes tired but affectionate. "Where are you headed today?" she asked softly, wrapping her shawl tighter around herself. "Just down to—" "The old house," Lacey said lightly, careful not to alarm her mother. "We won't be long." Janelle hesitated but nodded, her gaze softening at the sight of her daughter's newfound purpose. "Be safe," she said gently, returning to her letters, unaware of the adventure unfolding in her daughter's heart. Outside, Marley trotted alongside Lacey, their breath forming tiny clouds in the crisp morning air. As they approached the abandoned house, it loomed ahead, ghostly yet inviting. Marley paused at the front steps, nose lifted slightly as though sensing something beneath their feet. Lacey followed Marley around to the back, finding the old cellar door half hidden beneath ivy and weeds. It was worn, the hinges rusted, its latch barely hanging on. Marley whined softly, pawing at the door, eager. Together, they tugged the old wooden hatch open. Cold air rushed upward from below, tinged with a musty smell of earth and forgotten years. Lacey switched on her small flashlight, its beam shaking slightly in her hands as they descended into the cellar's darkness. The cellar was filled with shadows and memories. Boxes stacked unevenly leaned against damp walls, and furniture covered with dusty cloth stood silently. At the back corner, Marley led her toward a large wooden trunk, its brass clasps tarnished but still intact. Carefully, Lacey lifted the lid. A gasp escaped her lips as she shone her light inside. Neatly arranged were worn notebooks, stacks of old drawings, sheet music, and photographs. Ellie's handwriting covered pages filled with song lyrics and diary entries. Lacey carefully picked up a notebook bound in faded blue cloth. Its cover bore Ellie's delicate handwriting, "Whispers from Below, Ellie Monroe." Lacey opened the notebook, her heart racing as she read quietly. "Music saves me when nothing else can. They don't understand, but Marley does. He listens to every song, every whisper." Lacey glanced at Marley, his eyes fixed intently on her. Gentle and understanding. "You listened to her too, didn't you?" she murmured. As Lacey continued to leaf through the memories, another entry stood out starkly, causing her pulse to quicken. "They've decided to send me away, to a place where they say I'll heal. But healing isn't leaving. It's finding the courage to stay. I promise I'll find my way back to you, Marley." Her fingers trembled slightly, empathy washing over her in waves. Ellie hadn't run away. She'd been taken from everything she loved. Meanwhile, at Floyd's home, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window onto the small oak table. Floyd sat across from Sarah, both holding steaming mugs of tea. A quiet tension hovered between them. "I spoke with Winfield again," Floyd said quietly. "He's been trying to track down Ellie for years. The place they sent her, it closed. Down years ago. Records lost, names forgotten." Sarah's eyes clouded. "We need to know if she's still alive. Ellie deserves to be remembered, to have her story known." Floyd nodded solemnly, eyes sharp and determined. "Maybe someone out there knows something. If she made it out, someone must remember her." Sarah smiled faintly, grateful for Floyd's quiet strength. "Thank you, Floyd," she whispered. "So you've done more than anyone else." He cleared his throat gruffly, unaccustomed to tenderness. "We'll find her, Sarah." Back in the cellar, Lacey carefully tucked the notebook into her bag. Marley's ears perked suddenly, hearing footsteps. Overhead, Lacey froze, flashlight pointed upward, heart pounding. The cellar door creaked open wider and sunlight spilled down. "Lacey?" Janelle's voice was tentative, cautious. "Are you down there?" "Mom?" Lacey called, relieved. "I'm here." Janelle stepped carefully into the cellar, her eyes wide, cautious yet curious. "What are you doing here?" Lacey hesitated, then carefully held out Ellie's notebook. "Mum, Marley was waiting for Ellie. She never wanted to leave." Janelle took the notebook carefully, her fingers brushing the faded pages, her expression softening in understanding. "We all carry our past," she said softly, meeting Lacey's earnest gaze, "but it's never too late to heal." Lacey looked up, sensing something new in her mother's words. Hope, acceptance, possibility. Together, they climbed from the cellar into the clear sunlight, Marley close beside them. As they stepped onto the grass, a familiar figure approached, Julia. Winfield stood quietly nearby, watching warmly. "I see you found Ellie's things," Julia said gently, eyes warm with emotion. "She always said Marley was more than just a dog. He was her heart." Janelle smiled gently, nodding. "He's become ours too," Julia's voice softened further. "Ellie believed deeply in second chances. Wherever she is now, I think she'd be happy knowing you found this." Lacey squeezed Marley's collar gently. "We won't forget her." Julia nodded, a quiet peace crossing her face. "I know you won't." That evening, Floyd stood with Sarah beneath, the pale twilight sky, watching as lights in houses around Willow Creek blinked on one by one, comforting beacons against the approaching darkness. "I think we'll find her," Sarah whispered softly, her voice firm with conviction. "I feel it." Floyd squeezed her hand gently, his gaze steady and sure. Ellie's story isn't over yet. Nearby, at the Quinn's house, Lacey sat on her bed. Marley curled at her feet. The notebook lay open beside her, Ellie's words a quiet testament to courage and hope. She glanced up at the stars, silently promising Ellie and herself that their story would find its way home. And Marley, wise, beyond words, pressed gently against her, a silent guardian of secrets, memories, and promises, whispered quietly from below. Winter had truly arrived in Willow Creek, blanketing the small town in a delicate veil of snow. The air held the brittle clarity of mid-December, the skies stretching grey, softly blending into the snowy horizon. The residents, bundled warmly, moved about with purpose, preparing for the upcoming Christmas celebration that brought a quiet joy to the gentle-hearted community. Lacey stood at her bedroom window, gently tracing frost patterns that bloomed upon the glass, lost in thoughts of Ellie and Marley. Marley rested comfortably beside her bed, eyes half closed but vigilant, ever the silent guardian. Today felt different. An unknown energy hung softly in the air, delicate and expectant. After finding Ellie's belongings, Lacey had spent days carefully, poring over each notebook, each sketch. She felt closer to Ellie, a girl she'd never met but whose heart she'd somehow come to know. Marley's ears suddenly perked, alerting her to activity outside. Footsteps crunched along the snowy sidewalk. Lacey glanced out to see Floyd and Sarah approaching her house, their faces earnest yet hopeful. Hurriedly wrapping herself in a woolen coat, Lacey rushed down to greet them. Marley trotted faithfully at her side, his golden fur glowing softly against the pristine snow. Floyd stood tall, rugged as ever, his military bearing softened by a newfound gentleness. Sarah's gaze was tender, calm despite the anticipation in her eyes. "We think we've found her," Floyd said quietly, his voice steady but trembling with emotion. Sarah nodded, eyes glistening. "Ellie's alive. She's coming here today." Lacey's breath caught, a joyous ache blooming within her chest. Marley barked softly as if understanding, sensing the imminent reunion. "She reached out to Julia last night," Floyd continued. "She asked about Marley. She asked about you too, Lacey." The girl's heart raced, 1,000 emotions flooding her small frame. She clutched Marley's collar gently, feeling the dog's warmth steadying her. "When will she be here?" she asked softly, Soon, Sarah replied, her voice gentle. She wants to see Marley at the old house. Together they walked toward the house at the end of Maple Street, Marley leading with quiet excitement. The abandoned home appeared less haunted beneath its snowy cover, more hopeful, awaiting closure. They stood in quiet expectancy, breath visible, in small clouds, hearts beating in unified anticipation. Then, softly breaking the silence, a figure emerged from a car parked nearby, slowly approaching through the snow. The woman was slender, wrapped in a long navy coat, her face pale yet radiant. Dark hair cascaded gently over her shoulders, grayed slightly by years and hardships endured. Her eyes, a warm brown, held a depth of gentle melancholy and resilience. This was Ellie Monroe, returned home at last. Marley paused, ears forward, eyes widening. His tail began to wag gently, recognizing the approaching figure from memories. Long past, Ellie knelt in the snow, extending her trembling hands. "Marley," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The old golden retriever approached carefully, sniffed softly, and suddenly pressed himself into her arms, tail wagging joyously. Tears streamed silently down Ellie's cheeks as she buried her face in Marley's fur, releasing years of hidden sorrows in a profound reunion. Lacey watched quietly, tears in her own eyes. Ellie stood slowly, her gaze gentle yet intense, meeting Lacey's. "You're Lacey, aren't you?" she asked softly, her voice warm and kind. Lacey nodded quietly. "I've been waiting to meet you." Ellie smiled, eyes glistening, voice filled with quiet gratitude. "You've cared for Marley. You've kept our promise alive." Around them, Floyd and Sarah stood silently, hands clasped gently, witnessing the heartfelt reunion. Sarah stepped forward hesitantly, tears brightening her eyes. "Ellie, sweetheart," she whispered tenderly, arms opening in quiet invitation. "Aunt Sarah," Ellie breathed, stepping into the embrace, both women holding tightly, hearts healing. In that single moment, Floyd watched with quiet satisfaction, his typically stern face softened by an uncharacteristically gentle smile. Ellie turned again to Lacey, her eyes earnest. "Thank you," she said softly. "You've reminded me how much strength comes from remembering those we love." That evening, the residents of Willow Creek gathered in the town square, illuminated by golden strings of Christmas lights. Ellie, warmly wrapped, stepped onto the small wooden platform, Marley and Lacey close behind. A hush spread through the crowd as Ellie sat before the piano, placed there specially for this occasion. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly, before softly beginning to play. Her music rose gently into the cold night, a melody filled with love, longing, forgiveness, and finally, homecoming. Marley lay quietly at her feet, his warm presence a comfort and inspiration. Sarah leaned against Floyd, her eyes closed, moved profoundly by the music. Floyd's steady hand rested gently on hers, understanding and comfort exchanged silently between them. When Ellie's final notes lingered softly in the night air, the crowd erupted into gentle applause, heartfelt and genuine. Ellie rose, turning, to smile warmly at Lacey and Marley, acknowledging the silent support they'd offered. Later, as families dispersed, Ellie approached Sarah and Floyd, her eyes clear and calm. "I thought I'd lost everything," she whispered, "but you showed me home still waited." Floyd nodded gently, voice rough with emotion. "Your story mattered, Ellie. It was never forgotten." Ellie's gaze fell upon Marley and Lacey, standing near, sharing quiet whispers and soft laughter, hearts forever intertwined by destiny. "Thank you both," Ellie whispered softly. "You've given me my life back." In the gentle quiet that followed, Floyd turned towards Sarah, voice low and tender, eyes reflecting years of unspoken affection. "Life's short, Sarah," he murmured softly. "Let's not waste it any longer." Sarah's breath caught gently as Floyd gently clasped her hand, warmth and silent promise exchanged in their quiet smiles. At the edge of the square, Lacey knelt beside Marley, gently stroking his fur, whispering softly, "You did it, Marley. You brought Ellie home." Marley looked up, wise eyes warm, gently pressing his head against her, contentment radiating from him. Above them, stars shone gently through the quiet winter night. Witness to a town healing, hearts reconnecting, stories woven delicately back, together through love and second chances. And Marley, loyal and patient, lay contentedly in the quiet glow of reunion, his promise finally fulfilled. Willow Creek lay quiet beneath a sky ablaze with the soft colors of twilight, hues of gold, lavender, and deepening indigo stretching gently above the sleepy town. Christmas lights glowed softly, draping porches and street lamps with gentle warmth, the entire community readying itself for the long-awaited celebration in the town square. It was the evening of Willow Creek's annual winter concert, transformed this year into a heartfelt reunion, a collective healing. Families and friends gathered, bundled in scarves and heavy coats, breath visible in small clouds carrying steaming cups of hot chocolate. Quiet laughter and gentle conversations filled the air, blending sweetly with the faint aroma of pine and cinnamon. Lacey stood beside Marley, feeling the warmth of the dog pressing close to her side, comforting and steady. Marley's golden fur glistened softly under the hanging lights, eyes clear, wise, and full of gentle contentment. Beside them stood Ellie Monroe, wearing a soft blue coat that enhanced her gentle beauty. Her eyes were bright with tears unshed, her expression serene but touched deeply by gratitude and reunion. Janelle stood nearby, her expression calm, relieved. Her eyes sought out Lacey often, the quiet pride in her daughter unmistakable. They exchanged soft smiles, reassurance that the grief once carried alone was now shared, softened by community, friendship, and newfound bonds. At the edge of the makeshift stage, Floyd Hargrove stood, carefully adjusting the microphone. Despite his usual reserved nature, tonight Floyd's posture carried quiet anticipation, his stern features softened by hope. Sarah Mulvaney watched him fondly, her heart warmed by the comfort of his steady presence. Together they shared a gentle glance, an unspoken promise woven into the evening's quiet joy. Ellie stepped gently onto the small wooden stage, the old upright piano from the clearing placed carefully at center stage. It had been carefully restored, its faded beauty lovingly revealed beneath the soft lights. The lavender blossoms found nearby rested on its polished top, their fragrance gentle, recalling the whispered secrets of the clearing. "Good evening, everyone," Ellie began softly, voice gentle yet resonating warmly. "Many years ago I lost my way, but someone special taught me that the roads we travel may change, but home remains in our hearts. Tonight is dedicated to Marley, to Lacey, and to all those who help us find our way back." A hush descended as Ellie settled at the piano, her slender fingers hovering briefly above the keys. With gentle precision, she began to play, a melody that had lived silently within her for years, filled with quiet sorrow, transformed slowly into gentle hope, a promise fulfilled in notes cascading gently through the cool air. Marley lay quietly at Lacey's feet, ears lifted, head raised proudly. The music flowed softly, drawing forth smiles and quiet tears from those listening. Floyd reached discreetly for Sarah's hand, their fingers interlocking tenderly. Janelle, standing behind Lacey, gently rested her hands on her daughter's shoulders, sharing warmth and quiet pride. The music swelled gently before ebbing quietly into silence, Ellie's final note lingering delicately, an echo of past heartache and future promise. As gentle applause erupted warmly, Floyd stepped forward, microphone carefully in hand, clearing his throat awkwardly but resolutely. "If I could have your attention just a bit longer," he began softly, voice steady yet emotional. "This town has seen hurt and healing. Tonight we learned again that some stories find their ending only to begin anew." He turned slowly towards Sarah, his voice lowering, filled with tenderness rarely revealed. "Sarah Mulvaney, you've shown me that healing isn't about forgetting, it's about finding someone to remember with. Will you marry me?" The crowd fell into anticipatory silence. Sarah's breath caught, tears gathering gently, shining in her eyes. A quiet, radiant smile spread across her lips as she nodded, voice trembling but warm. "Yes, Floyd, yes, I will." Warm applause rippled joyfully through the gathered crowd. Ellie stepped from the piano, embracing Sarah warmly, both women laughing. through their tears. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Ellie approached Lacey gently, taking the girl's hands carefully in hers. "I owe you so much, Lacey," she whispered softly. "You and Marley have reminded me what matters most: love, patience, the courage to hold on to hope." Lacey's eyes shone quietly, cheeks flushed with warmth. "I didn't really do anything," she replied softly. Ellie squeezed her hands gently. "You believed. Sometimes that's everything." Ellie knelt briefly, embracing Marley tenderly, his gentle tail wagging warmly in response, their bond everlasting despite the years apart. When Ellie finally walked toward Sarah and Floyd, Marley leaned gently into Lacey, his wise eyes filled with quiet affection. Janelle joined them, wrapping her arms warmly around her daughter. They stood quietly together beneath the stars, hearts comforted, connections deepened. As the crowd dispersed quietly into the night, Marley led Lacey gently toward the old house at the end of Maple Street, their breath visible in the chilly air. Together, they sat on the familiar porch steps, looking out into the gentle night. Marley settled at her feet, head resting gently upon her knee. "You did it, Marley," Lacey whispered, gently stroking his fur, her voice filled with quiet awe. "You kept your promise." Marley lifted his gentle eyes toward her, serene and understanding. He had waited faithfully, loyally, and now his journey had reached completion. Lacey leaned into Marley's warmth, gazing quietly toward the horizon. The sky deepened gently into velvet darkness, scattered stars softly twinkling above, illuminating their quiet bond. Somewhere within her heart, Lacey knew this moment was both an ending and a beginning, a quiet promise made and fulfilled beneath. The gentle dusk of Willow Creek, and beside her Marley sighed softly, a sound of pure contentment, loyal companion and guardian of whispered dreams finally come true. Marley's unwavering loyalty teaches us the profound power of patience, hope, and believing in promises no matter how long it takes. Just as Marley waited faithfully for Ellie's return, we too can find strength in patience, comfort in hope, and courage in holding on to the promises we make to others and ourselves. After all, every story left unfinished is merely waiting patiently for the right heart to complete it.